All right, how's everybody doing? Y'all doing pretty good? All right, all right, all right. All right, so we're still talking about the renewing of the mind, right? We were talking about the subconscious, and we kind of got into a little bit of the brought up some memories of some things, some occurrences in our lives that kind of have led to some of our um things that are in our subconscious and kind of led to the way that we've responded to things and the way the emotions that we feel, the habits that we formed. We discussed a little bit of that on Wednesday. All right, so let's continue. Let's continue. All right, so we read Jeremiah 1 and 5, right? We'll go back to it right quick, and we won't spend very much time because we kind of discussed it a little bit. Jeremiah 1 and 5 says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I have appointed you a prophet to the nations." All right. So, yes, we may have some of these subconscious feelings and these things that, you know, lead us to believe otherwise. But God is telling us something here, right?
Right.
So this needs to be in our subconscious, isn't it? It's in our conscious mind, but not in our subconscious. You know, we've had a time, right? Our people have had a time in this world and in this country especially. We've been told so many things over the years, how bad we are. Even today, you look at the news and media and whatnot, and all we do is gang bang and do bad stuff, right? That's the perception of us, of our culture, the perception of our race, and we've bought into that many times. I think some of what, especially the youth, they do certain stuff because they think that's what they're supposed to do because you know the message that they have gotten is that they're no good, and so they're supposed to be no good. And they take pride in, you know, committing crimes and take pride in not doing the right thing and not loving one another. Our youth, and some of our old people do too, but some of our youth, they brag on that kind of thing. Yes, sir, I can tell you about to say something.
Going back to when you first started that conversation, I guess we can go all the way back to just not a hot topic, a good topic, but going back to slavery. Back then, our people,
Back when?
slavery, back then, our people depended on God. If we God all over everything they did, how they operated. But now you move forward to this generation of people now, because I just got to do it. So I said, back then, that was their that was their money. That was their riches. That was their gold. Because they knew long as they stayed focused with God, kept God on their mind, talked to God, sang about God, they was gonna be all right. But as the generation comes forward, we gotten away from that. There's belief in God, there's one to still serve God, but they're not dependent on God as much now as they were back then.
Was it?
Because now they can get them riches that they would put it all in God back then. Now they can get those riches. I get the big bank account, the nice cars, the nice house and stuff.
Hmm.
It materialized more. So dependency of God start losing some of its zeal.
Yeah,
So like you say, and that's that mind thing.
yeah. Almost said I agree with James. I was just about to say it, yo.
That's funny.
Now I had to hold back. You
Because the
know,
truth is
but
truth. I
but but
mean,
you do
really,
make a good
because you
point.
see, I think about it.
You do make a good point.
Because that's if you really look at it, that's a lot of what's done changed. It's the mindset. Back then, even though they was in this, they depended on God
And now we don't think we need God.
because now we got a little bit more freedom to go out and get them riches that we were, back then. When things got tough, real tough, you know, yeah, I didn't feel working. They were singing to the Lord.
Yeah.
When they get
So
home from work, they were singing to the Lord.
so let's back up. Let's back up a little bit on that. So where does that come from? Where does that come from? We talked about it yesterday about the idols, idolatry.
Mm.
We talked a little bit about it yesterday, right? A lot about it yesterday. So the idolatry. So back in those days, slavery days, what did we see? We had nothing, of course, right? We was in the shacks, dirt floor shacks. Other people had the big houses. Other people had they had the land. They had the money, they had the farms, whatever. And then cars came up, they probably bought cars and all that kind of stuff. We were, we didn't have. So then, as you say, as we got freedom and got to a point to where we could get some things, so it became to where we were. I mean, I'm just trying to put myself in that position. We probably looked at them as if, okay, look, they've got all this money. They can do what they want to do. They've got freedom. They can eat what they want to eat. They're not eating the that's why chitlins is a delicacy now, right? Because we got the pig's feet, you know, liver. We got the part of the pig that they didn't want to eat, right?
Right.
And so that's what they gave us to eat with, what was left over. And so we turned it into, a delicacy. Now people love that stuff, but um, um, but so we looked at them like we want to be like them. We want to get to where we can have that stuff. And so is that where our idolatry began? Perhaps. I mean, I don't know. What do y'all think? Go ahead.
I think you made a good point there. Even though in them times we didn't have access to things, right? There were seeds that are being planted the whole while. The seed of if I can get to this point, if I can have this, then I'll be something.
Mm,
And I think they got a word for it. The word is called propaganda.
mm,
Um, you go back and look up the history of that word and what it means.
uh-huh.
It take you all the way back World War II past that and it became a science. Or basically, if I can implant certain ideas, certain images, certain messages, and do it repeatedly, then they start becoming ingrained. To the point that even our president said, they asked him why he lied so much. And he said, because if repeat something enough times, the lie becomes the truth.
Mm,
The truth becomes the fact.
mm. Okay, okay, okay.
And so
Yeah.
what we have to look at it when we start talking about renewing our mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why we don't invert that? Why don't we repeat the truth so many times that it becomes ingrained? The meditating on it day and night. That's really what's in that verse is that hey, ingrain these things into you, repeat them until they become part of you.
Right.
And I think same thing with what we talk about the youth. The news, they put the stuff on the news is all negative, right? Why don't we repeat blessings upon one another? How am I not going out and saying, man, Brand, the band teacher, awesome lesson this day, man. I can tell the hours he put into it. I can put out my own propaganda. It don't have to be negative.
Yeah, yeah. But we'll take that negative and
Run with it.
and 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 then it becomes like what we call it a self-fulfilling prophecy to where you start imitating what you see because you think that's where we're supposed to be. All right. Now, and another point of this, all right. So even today, when somebody's struggling, what do they end up doing? What do they do a lot? When somebody's going through something, they start coming in them doors, right? But when things get good again, what you see? Yeah, they don't come. They don't come anymore. So let's go back to our people when we were in bondage. As James said, we were praising God, singing to God. All we're working in the fields. We out there singing the whole time. And we become free. We started getting freedoms. And you think about even during the civil rights movement, where were all the civil rights meetings and things of that nature? Mostly. in churches. It all stemmed from the church, right? Mostly down there, you start at having other factions that were, not in churches and whatnot, but it really started in the church. So we were very God fearing and very connected to God when we were going through stuff. So then when we become free, it's we got away from that. We're not in the church as much, and now we've got the subconscious that we're talking about. Like I said, the propaganda that we're hearing, we're putting that propaganda in our subconscious instead of the positive in our subconscious. Perhaps I don't know what y'all think.
Going back to what I said, what started happening was we went from God to I.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
You know, you had in the subconscious, you know, we knew to praise God, make God, but now I am in a position where, you know, I'm doing something. And now I forgot all this time that I've been coming along, going through things, God been holding me up. God been,
Yeah.
so but all of a sudden now, oh, I done made it. I done made it. So we went from God to I.
So what do you think that stems from? You know, this this hypothetical situations, all right? But as little black kids coming up, what do we hear about ourselves all the time? We're too black, your nose too big, your lips too full, whatever. You bow-legged, whatever it is, things that were our culture, right? Our music. Y'all listen to that jungle music. You hear so much negative about yourself, you know. How many of you just think back? How many of you, I didn't say that you dreamed to be one, but how many of you thought that you could be an astronaut coming up? Did anybody ever say that, you know what, I'm gonna fly to the moon? Now, you were probably told by teachers and preachers and aunts and uncles you could be anything you want to be. I know I was told that. Nothing in the world could stop you. You got the power to be whatever you want to be. But I still never dreamed I could be an astronaut. I thought I was for somebody else. Not that I want to be. Now that I'm grown, I'm glad I wasn't an astronaut because I'm like, man, I get stuck out there in the moon somewhere. But, but, but I really never thought I could be an astronaut. I didn't think I could touch the world, even though I was told. My conscious mind was told that, but subconsciously, I didn't think I could because I didn't see it. We were told so much negative coming up. You saw so much negative, you know, and you know, I I'm not as old as some in here, like James Hall, but I'm younger than some others, older than some others. All right, so I mean, just think about TV. What did you see on TV? Much. Now, yeah, you had the Cosby Show in the '80s, and it's in the '70s. Go back to the '70s. You had what? George Jefferson was about the only successful black person on TV, on his own business, right? Moved up to the East Side.
Right.
Yeah, Sanford son. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Be a businessman. You own a junkyard. You know, And offset George Jefferson. They had the Evans family. In the projects in Chicago,
Yeah.
they had some good times, right? They couldn't get ahead for nothing. I mean, what kind of message was that putting in our heads? Okay, yeah, yeah, you got one over here, but for the most part, you know, you just didn't see a lot of it. You didn't see it. And I grew up in a small town, which made it, probably even worse. You grew up somewhere like Atlanta, you probably saw successful businessmen and stuff like that. But in a little small town, Georgia, you didn't see much. You didn't have much you know, to think that you could grow. So, James, going back to your point. Now, I'm not trying to make excuses for this, but our people got to a point, like you said, we started thinking, I, because we wanted to make ourselves feel good about ourselves because of perhaps we did that to make ourselves feel good about ourselves because of all the negativity we heard about ourselves from being little children. Then when we got to a point that we did do something more than what everybody said, said we could be, it's like, well, I did this, it's like you felt good about yourself. Now, I'm not saying that was right, I was saying maybe that led to that. I don't know. I don't know.
Jeremiah, we were talking about the prophet and stuff. I think as people, we forget we have a responsibility to go out into the world and preach and teach. But I think sometimes some people get caught up in that word when it comes to preaching. They'll take it to a place that it shouldn't go. But anything that God gives us, we're to take it and share with others, which could be a form of preaching and teaching. So if you're doing what Jeremiah tells us to do, a lot of what we're talking about now will change because what it's gonna make you do is gonna make you study. It's gonna make you put the focus on God with everything. That way, because we know, hands down, what's in you is what's gonna come out of you.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
if you're doing if you're doing what God purposed you to do, then I is no longer part of your vocabulary.
Yeah. 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 As you study and learn more and get much better understanding. But you're right. And and as we were reading in Jeremiah, he formed you in your womb, right? And you were set apart from others, and he appointed you a prophet to the nations. So that is in us. That is in us, and we've got to get that subconscious thinking. That's got to be in our DNA, so to speak.
A lot of times people they run away from that
Yeah, exactly.
because
Why? Why you think?
like I said again, it falls back on some negative stuff that's been put in front of them before.
Mhm.
You know, look at them. They think they so holy. They think but they're just doing what God purposed them to do.
Mm.
But the ones that making those kind of comments don't understand because they haven't taken the time to try to get a relationship with God. So it seems like, you know, out of place for me to be walking up every time I walk up to somebody having a conversation about God and Jesus, you know. But that's what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And some think they're not worthy of doing that.
Yeah, and something
They've made mistakes in the past. They've done, did not hadn't lived the perfect life, and made a mistake yesterday or early this morning. And so you think you're not worthy of telling someone about God, and you know I can understand that, but we've got to understand what God has done for us, what God has put in us.
Going back to yesterday.
Hmm.
And I was scared when I got that assignment. But then once I got the assignment and I did what I'm supposed to do with the assignment, you know, you talk to God, you take what God given you, and you study what God given you, and then you present.
That's all there is to it, right?
Yeah, and in your presenting, you realize, man,
You're scared for nothing.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. James led our discussion yesterday. Our men's leadership meeting we had yesterday. James led us on the topic, and he want all y'all to know that. That's why he said why he brought it up. Yes, did a pretty good job. Pretty good job. Though. Did good. Did good. So it's in you. We need to know that it's in us, and God's gonna help us through it. All right. So let's go to Psalms, the book of Psalms. We're going to Psalm 139, 13 through 16, and I'll read it right quick. For you formed my inward parts. You wove me in my mother's womb. I will give thanks to you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in secret and skillfully wrought in the depths of the earth. Your eyes have seen my unformed substance, and in your book were all written the days that were ordained for me, when as yet there was not one of them. All right, that's Psalm 139, verses 13 through 16. All right, so talks about again um, um, uh, being formed. You wove me in my mother's womb. All right, so that's before you were born. You form my inward parts. What does that mean? What is that telling us? What are your inward parts? What is it referring to? Your inner spirit. Your it's probably talking about your DNA and all that too, but also talking about your we talk about the subconscious. You know, you know what comes out of us, what James says, is what's in us. So if God formed our inward parts, then what is in us?
He
He is. So if that's the case, what should be coming out of us? Should be Him, right? Should be Him. So our deepest our deepest thoughts, our intentions, our motives, all that should be from God, because He formed our inward parts. Yes,
Yeah.
that's kind of how I see it. I don't know. Um, and He knows us. He knows us. Um, said it. You wove me in my mother's womb. When you think of something being was it woven? Is it weaving? Woven. uh, that's like connected together, right? Took these things and produced it, but connected it all together perfectly, like a nice quilt. Anybody here does quilting or knitting or anything? No? Mm. But y'all have seen it. Yeah, you do. Okay, there you go. There you go. So you know how you take a needle and thread, you can make a beautiful ensemble, right?
Mm-hmm.
And wove all these things together with one. So he wove our inner parts together to create something great. You got something?
Yeah, you kind of hit something right there. There used to be a thing when a couple got married. They used to take these cords and they braid them. Well, if you didn't do anybody ever done any kind of braiding, you got one cord that stays in the middle. The other cords move, right? What's the cord that doesn't move? God. That concept was to give you the idea to put it in your mind. The reason this marriage is supposed to work, supposed to last, right? Because he's supposed to be in the middle of it. And because it's woven together, it's stronger than the other parts by themselves.
Okay. Very good, very good. You're right. You're right. You know, our, you know, our personalities, whatever's unique about each and every one of us, was crafted by God, and as long as we're uh interwoven with Him, that strength is always there. Let's go to Exodus 20. Y'all know what Exodus is? Pretty close to the front then. And verses 5 and 6. Someone read that, please. Exodus 20, 5 and 6.
You should not worship them nor serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, taking the punishment of fathers on the children, on the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me.
Go ahead and read 6.
16,
Yeah.
for showing favor, thousand those who love me and keep my commandments.
All right. So, all right. So we've been talking about the subconscious, right? So, and we talked about idols, how idols have been produced by our people, by all people, but our people as well. So what's going to happen if we don't have a renewing of the mind? If we don't come back to where we should be? What is this saying? That it will be, which my version says, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generations of those who hate me. So not only will your life suffer, your children and your children's children and your children's children's children will suffer. All right, now, what does that mean exactly? Now, we're talking about the subconscious mind, right? Things that have been, we talked about how things that affected you from a child, how how it still affects your emotions, how it still affects your habits, the things that you do each and every day. Yes, yes, sir.
I think what that kind of means is those things that affect your mind will be passed down to your children and passed down from them to their children, and it'll keep it being passed down.
Yeah.
And it becomes something stuck in their subconscious. But
Mhm.
yeah, still good.
Yeah, 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 exactly, exactly. So using James' example, yes, I said that using James' example, we talked about, our people and how we wanted what the Caucasians had, right? Then we got it, and we started talking about what I did, right? I have this, I achieved these things, right? So that's been passed down, from the 40s and 50s and 60s. That's been passed down to another generation, right? So I was born in the 60s. So that could have been passed down to me. I have children who are in their 20s. So I could have passed it down to my children. My children in their 20s could have kids. They don't yet, as far as I know. That's your son. But uh, they could be passing it down to their children, right? So these feelings, these subconscious lies that we have believed about ourselves have been basically cursed through the generations. They've been passed down. There's something that your grandparents did. I don't know what it is. Your grandparents said or did that your parents picked up, and your parents probably said and did the same things or similar things to you, and you probably say and do similar things that they did. I don't know if you remember this. Y'all ever heard the term "you don't believe sugar sweet"? Now, I've heard that several times, coming up. Never knew what it meant, never understood it. And then, I don't know how old Zachary was. He probably was 10, 10, 11, 12, something like that. And I remember I don't know, he was talking about something and kept wanting something, just wasn't satisfied. I said, boy, you don't believe sugar sweet, do you? I mean, I understood exactly what it meant at that point. And Adrian was, I don't know if you remember, Adrian started laughing. This is my wife, for those who don't know. She started laughing when I said it. But I was like, okay, I understand what that means now. Boy, you don't believe sugar sweet. But that's just something that was passed down. And I didn't even know, I've never said that before in my life that I remember, until that point. Till he did or said whatever he was doing or saying. I said, boy, you believe sugar sweet, do you? So it was in my subconscious without me even knowing it, right? It just came out. But I immediately understood, oh, that's what my mom and daddy meant when they told me that. I mean, so it's things that they do and say that affect you. Now, some of it's comical, like this. Some of it may be, you know, more detrimental to you, you know. Um, could have been something else they passed down, and we've got to break that cycle. It's in our subconscious. We don't know it's there probably, but it's there. And we've got to somehow break the cycle of those things that aren't good for us, that separate us from God. They're separating us from God. They're the lies that the devil has told us, that told our great great grandparents, that told the great, I said great great grandparents, they told the great grandparents, who then told the grandparents, who told the parents, who told us. And we're telling our kids and grandkids now. we've got to break that cycle, that generational cycle of whatever that is, if it's separating us from God. And what does that take? It takes us to understand it. We need a renewing of the mind. We've got to understand that it's there so that we can work on changing it. What they tell an alcoholic? I don't know what they tell them. I never been to them AA meetings, but they tell them, you got to admit that you got a problem.
Yeah.
That's like I seen them on TV. The first thing they say is, "My name is Van, and I'm an alcoholic." Right? You got to say it. You got to admit that there's an issue. Because if you don't admit there's an issue, you're never going to truly work on it. If you don't think you need to be better, guess what you're not going to do? You know, if you don't think you need to learn more, you're not going to start reading because you already think you know it.
Mm.
You see what I'm saying? Or if you trust me, which you shouldn't be doing, trust me to tell you everything. So I ain't got to read because Brother Van gonna tell me everything. Well, Brother Van gonna get stuff wrong. Y'all need to be reading for yourselves. Okay? So that's something we've got to change. We've got to know that there's some issues there
Mm.
in all of us, in our subconscious, and we've got to renew our mind in some way. Yes, sir.
Now, something James said that was really good right at the tail end before we got out was, he said, what the idolatry, the idol worship does, it doesn't just stop the person who's got the idol, take them away from God. But then eventually what happens is they go bring the idol to somebody else.
Exactly.
And then now you pulling another person away. And it's like, it's almost like if you got somebody out there cutting your grass and doing your yard work, and you got a weed over there. If they go and take that weed trimmer and just scalp the top of that weed, you know it's coming back, right? That
Hmm.
you got to pull that thing up by the root.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or kill it down to the root some kind
Yeah,
of way, right?
it's got to go to
Yeah,
whatever you're doing to get rid of it. It's
yeah,
got to go to the root.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's what we need to do, with our minds right now. We've got to go to the root of how we got to where we are. Why we think the way we think, why we react the way we react, why we feel the way we feel, because it's separating us from God. And so we've got to do some work on that. Get down to the root of the things. All right. Very good. Well, any other questions, comments? All right.